And welcome to a further instalment of Life with Full Intention. Sorry, Full Attention. Life with Full Attention. And I'm going to start by just reviewing where we've got to so far. So first of all, we were looking at day-to-day mindfulness, which is, in a sense, the art of not being distracted. So we're looking at really the basis of mindfulness, just being able to stay with one thing and not to go from one thing to another, just staying with one thing, even with very mundane, very day-to-day items. Then we moved on to the first sphere of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of body and movements, including our posture. So the body is said to be the anchor of awareness. It's always a good thing to return to if we feel that we need to be more grounded, if we feel perhaps anxious or uncertain. We can always return to our body. Our body is always there for us to return to. Then we moved on to the mindfulness of Vedana, the second sphere of mindfulness. So these are sensations, and in particular the texture of those sensations, whether they're pleasant, painful, or neutral. And then in the previous week of the course, we looked at citta, this heart-mind, where we become mindful of our thoughts, emotions, feelings, impulses. All those things that we experience through our mind, both the thoughts and the emotions. The third sphere of mindfulness. So to start with, I thought we could just do a little revision via meditation. So we'll just do a short meditation now, 10 to 15 minutes, where we remind ourselves in a practical way of mindfulness of these elements. So if you'd like to get yourselves comfortable, perhaps close your eyes if you wish, remembering your posture. And turn your mind towards meditation, allowing yourself to fall into a meditative state of mind. So firstly, become aware of your intention. It's easy to become distracted by this and that. So just set the intention that you're going to stay with this meditation for the next few minutes. Be aware of any little tugs or pulls trying to distract you from your purpose. So remembering your intention. So we move on now to a mindfulness of our body. To become aware of the fullness of your body, where it's coming into contact with the rest of the world, where you feel gravity. Being aware of your posture. Attempting to be relaxed but alert in your body. Noticing too any subtle movements. So now become aware of Vedana, sensations, and in particular the texture of those sensations that you feel. Are they pleasant? Are they painful? Or are they neutral? So those things you experience through your sense organs. Any aches or pains. Or a pleasant sensation of uprightness, perhaps. What do you notice? And now we come to this third sphere of mindfulness, citta, our heart-mind. All that we experience through our minds, both thoughts and emotions. So let yourself become aware of your thoughts and your emotions, all that you experience, are experiencing through your mind. And of course, we're making no judgments as to whether things are supposedly good or supposedly bad. We're just observing, noticing what's there. So we've just reminded ourselves of what we've covered in the previous few weeks on this course. Mindfulness of day-to-day things, mindfulness of body and movements, mindfulness of Vedana, mindfulness of citta. And having just gone through that in a meditative context, you might feel that, well, we've covered everything then, haven't we? You know, what is there else of which we can be aware, you might be asking. Well, that's what we're here for this evening. And the title of this evening, or the subtitle, is Mindfulness of Dhammas. bringing the teaching to mind. So when we practice mindfulness, as we just have, we can notice how our mind feels. We can notice the Vedana, whether there is, for example, a pain of resentment or a pleasure of contentment. We can notice citta, thoughts and emotions. And we can notice whether those things that arise in our mind and the things that we tell ourselves are helpful or unhelpful. When we become aware of this, we move from the third sphere of mindfulness to the fourth, from mindfulness of citta to mindfulness of Dhammas. And it's said that contemplating these Dhammas, these mental objects, teaches one to see the world through Buddhist spectacles. So mindfulness of Dhammas means training ourselves to notice that when we act out of positive states of mind and emotion, we feel happier, more creative, more tolerant, expansive, more open. So we notice those states of minds that are conducive to well-being, both in ourselves and in others. And equally those states of minds that are not conducive to well-being. In many ways, this is the heart of the Buddha's teaching. Hence, we are bringing the teaching to mind. If we want to experience authentic happiness, and I guess all living beings do, we need to discover ways of moving from unhelpful mental states, unskillful mental states, you might say, and emotions, to helpful mental states and emotions, positive, skillful mental states and emotions. That journey is the mindfulness of Dhammas. And a part of that, of course, is discovering for ourselves which mental states and emotions are helpful and which are unhelpful. When we practice mindfulness of Dhammas, we are trying to get to grips with who we are in the moment of being who we are. So trying to get to grips with who we are in the moment of being who we are. If, for instance, we notice that we're just about to go into yet another poor me monologue, we need to stop and remember that when we do this, we only make ourselves miserable. It's a bit like the equivalent of changing the subject in a conversation. So I've had an example of that for myself recently. I'm currently looking for work, a new job, and that's can be a dispiriting experience, I found at times, when you apply for jobs and are not accepted, or to put it another way, rejected. Clearly that's not a pleasant experience. And so my experience of that has been disappointment, a certain amount of despondency, I suppose, and then this tendency, this urge, in a sense, to get into a poor me monologue with myself, to roll out this sort of poor me story. I can feel myself being drawn in that direction. And of course, that's not at all helpful. I'll just end up feeling more miserable if I do that. But it's interesting because there's something nevertheless attractive about it. There's something, it's partly habit, I suppose. Partly that, maybe that's the way that the track that your mind has gone down in the past. But partly as well, maybe it's a bit of an abdication of responsibility in some way. I don't know really. There may be a number of things that are going on. But either way, I'm able to detect when it's happening. And then, of course, we can try to do something about it. Try to change that conversation rather than just going with that flow and ending up getting very despondent indeed. But we need to know ourselves in order to do this. Otherwise, we could tend to force ourselves to be what we think of as being spiritual. So when, for example, we might feel disappointment if you're rejected for a job, you don't get a job, maybe you've been looking forward to it, maybe you've been excited about it, and they say, no, sorry, it's a no this time. It's quite reasonable and understandable to feel disappointment, I think. So it wouldn't be particularly helpful to suppress that feeling, that emotion that arises. But on the other hand, it's not helpful to add weight to that, to add momentum to that. You can just be mindful of how you're feeling, just observing without adding to it, without trying to press it away or suppress it, just acknowledging the way that you're feeling. And I think a way of doing that is to be aware of your emotions, but to put alongside it, as it were, the spiritual reality. So to put the spiritual reality alongside the emotional reality that you are experiencing. And the spiritual reality may be to remind yourself that, well, ultimately, if I'm feeling defensive, if I'm feeling that I'm threatened or that I'm hard done by, of course, in reality, there is no fixed me to be challenged or attacked or hard done by. That's the spiritual reality. So we can put that alongside our emotional reality without trying to simply suppress or deny or be embarrassed by our emotions or our feelings. We lay them side to side and let them resolve themselves. There's said to be a law of desire, and I suppose the most noticeable example of that is falling in love. So we can convince ourselves that the object of our desire is perfect. It's just what we need. It might actually be, really useful if we're talking about an item. Let's say a new mobile phone. If we fall in love with this new mobile phone we see, we can try to convince ourselves, if I got that new mobile phone, it would be really handy because I could do this and that and the other. It would actually be quite useful. It wouldn't just be an indulgence. And you could convince yourself that you can afford it because, well, I've saved money there. I'd actually be saving money by doing this. So you could talk yourself into getting this thing, the object of your desire. You can contrive a way of getting it. Similarly, there's a law of hatred. So you might have some experience of that. If you fall out with somebody, if you have an argument with somebody, and then as you're traveling home or whatever it might be, you relive the argument in your mind, you talk about it in your mind, you tell yourself that you were right and they were wrong, what a bad person that they are. But then when you make up the next day, for example, and everything's nice again, and you look back at all those thoughts you have, you can see how silly they were. So it's easy to get carried away by the law of desire or the law of hatred. So that's a part of being aware of the Dhammas, being aware of these states of mind that arise. And the good thing is, with Buddhist ethics, acting skillfully has its own rewards. Vice versa is also true, of course. Acting unskillfully has its own consequences. So again, important to observe this. See what leads to what consequences. So mindfulness of the Dhammas requires us to do three things. Firstly, to notice the state of mind that we are in. Secondly, to create a gap of honest self-reflection. Particularly difficult, of course, if we're in the grip of quite strong emotions. And then 3, decide how best to act by bringing to mind the teachings that lead to authentic happiness. So we notice the state of mind we're in. We create that gap of honest self-reflection and then decide how best to act by bringing to mind the teachings.